So, for the past 30 days, I've been thinking.
And I've been watching X-Files for the past 30 days, like non-stop.
And what I've realized is that David Grusch has confirmed almost all big credible cases from the past 70 years.
Man, how the did they get everything right like 30 years ago?
I mentioned his story a couple of times already, but in today's video...
I want to be like Mulder so bad.
In today's video, I will tell you the whole story of the real Pentagon whistleblower you all know as David Grusch. David Grusch, the name of a man whose story has recently been echoing around YouTube and literally every other platform out there. From news and TV to Reddit and TikTok and everywhere in between, to be honest. And for a good reason. Secret government programs, the cover-up of UFO retrieval units, possession of downed alien craft, and real bodies of their pilots are just some of the topics Grusch has talked about during his News 7 interview. These statements made headlines all around the world, but that was only the beginning. The story we know is just scratching the surface, as he gave the full details with the exact places and people involved in the story to the Aero legislation team in confidential settings. This is the reason why in July of this year, the US Senate called for the official public hearings on the matter of the UFO phenomenon. And as David said himself,
I was informed in the course of my official duties of a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program. As you know, I've suffered retaliation for my decision, but I am hopeful that my actions will ultimately lead to a positive outcome of increased transparency. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Grusch came out with a story that is kind of like a stamp of approval for most big cases UFO researchers have been talking about for decades. All of this pretty much sounds like an X-Files episode if you ask me. I mean, let's go through everything Grusch has revealed and compare it to my favorite TV show. And just one more thing. Remember that this aired 30 years ago. First, we have the UFO retrieval units, and, well...
What she tracked was a meteor. Its aberrant movement was obviously due to instrument malfunction.
The first two seasons of the X-Files cover it pretty neatly. Let's see what we have here. Possession of downed alien craft? Check. Reverse engineering of said craft? Also check. Possession of the pilots' bodies? Aliens? Check. Secretive military groups outside of government jurisdiction? Check. A disinformation campaign led by the same groups? I think you get the picture. Those statements weren't made in a vacuum. We've known about all of this for at least 30 years, so what's the catch? Well, the catch is that David Grusch isn't your run-of-the-mill conspiracy theorist. His credentials, well, they're impeccable. His experience? Years of service and military intelligence. And yeah, that includes Black Ops. So when a man in his position speaks up, you can't help but listen. We're talking about secret government programs that sound like they're straight out of the Hollywood script, but it finally seems like the script is happening in real life. His recent appearance on the Joe Rogan's podcast was incredible, and he talked about cases that go back to the beginning of the 20th century. I'll get to that later on in the video, but for now, let's circle back a bit. I mentioned that we've known about all of this for at least 30 years, and I'm not gonna leave you hanging. Let me tell you about the moment that all of this started catching public's attention. This incident needs no introduction, and that is the Roswell UFO crash that happened almost 80 years ago. Roswell and Varginha UFO crashes. Cases that show us how much the US government has improved in covering up concrete evidence of extraterrestrial life. For starters, let's take a look at what happened in the year 1947. The World War II just ended, and the US is on high alert. Then out of nowhere, reports start coming in of a strange disc crashing in the New Mexico area. A disc that the whole town witnessed crashing and took pieces of. Even the elite squad responsible for deploying atomic weapons, the 509th Bomb Squadron, announces to the world that they had retrieved the wreckage of a crashed unknown flying saucer. And the news starts spreading like wildfire all across the world. This exact squadron then loaded up the strange craft on a B-29 bomber and flew to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the place where the Foreign Technologies Division was, or in simpler words, the only place where such an object could be reverse engineered. This trip had only one stop, which was at Fort Worth, Texas, where they were about to make an official announcement. This was sloppy, but the cover-up still took place when the 509th was told to keep quiet and to let military officials handle the situation. That is when the infamous weather balloon story was dropped on the public, and the 509 Squadron had to lie on record and say that they had mistaken the weather balloon's shiny surface for an exotic material from a supposed crash. This is really funny because every single member that was present at the conference later on in life confessed that the original story was true and that they were forced to lie. This incident didn't go unnoticed as it started the burning desire for truth in the masses even back then. And as I said, this crash was sloppy as the US military didn't really have experience yet in covering up such cases. I don't want to sound funny and say that the government covered this up, because we have a pretty good idea who was responsible for covering up such evidence. I mentioned the existence of a secretive government group called the Majestic 12 in my previous video about the Operation High Jump, a case that, interestingly enough, also occurred in the year of 1947. I suggest watching that video next, and I'll leave it on the end screen of this one, but for now, let's see how much had changed from the 40s to the 90s. In this interesting chain of events, we're going straight to the 90s. This case started early in the morning when the NORAD, or the North American Aerospace Defense Command, informed the Brazilian authorities that an unknown object had entered their airspace. I think you can already see how big this operation has grown, but nevertheless. The object had been spotted by a couple living on a farm near the edges of Varginha. The same object caught the attention of a man who himself was a pilot, and he thought he was witnessing a plane crash. He followed the strange cylinder as it was losing altitude rapidly. The object disappeared behind a hill and he saw a huge explosion. He quickly ran to the site and then he realized that there was no crashing airplane. The whole field was littered with pieces of strange metal. He picked some of it up and it was almost weightless. He bent it in his hands and when he released it, it fell to the ground and it regained its original form. He was looking around the site for survivors and then he heard the trucks incoming. Before he could do anything, he was surrounded and the military force threatened him with guns. This isn't how the story ends, however. The whole town was experiencing strange lockdowns. People were not allowed to leave for days. Large patrols were looking for something, and that's when three girls changed this story forever. Katya, Liliani and Valkyria were going back home because it started raining heavily and they were cutting through an empty house lot when in the corner of their eyes they saw something that stopped them in their tracks. Next to the brick wall was a small dark brown creature with huge red eyes. Liliani and Valkyria hightailed it out from the site as they were frightened, but Katya? Well, Katya stayed because she could hear the creature talking to her in her head. She later said that the creature was weak and scared and that it was asking for help. She snapped back to reality, however, when Liliani screamed out for her and they ran off home. When their mother saw them, she asked them about what had just happened. They told her about the encounter and she immediately ran to the empty house lot, but the creature was nowhere to be found. This story becomes even crazier because later that night, a police officer captures the creature of exactly the same description and he brings it to the hospital. That officer later died of unknown infections and all the doctors that were treating the creatures, and yeah, there were multiple creatures, have been silenced afterwards. The story ends up abruptly and, well, just guess how. Come on, say it. I know you can guess it. Pitch the drum roll. Yup, US Air Force. How unexpected. That US Air Force carrier had landed without permission and large metal containers had been loaded onto it along with a dozen of body bags. I will keep the rest of this story for another episode, so let me know in the comments if that's something you'd like to see in the future. Also, one other thing to mention are the strange white men dressed in suits who were visiting people involved in the Varginha UFO Incident. They were offering large amounts of money to people, telling them that it wouldn't be wise to pass on this opportunity as they could easily have an accident. I'm not gonna tell you that those are men in black, but... God damn it, this always happens when I talk about the men in... No. Okay. Alright. So, what was I trying to tell you? Oh yeah, the difference in the operational level between the Roswell crash in the late 40s and the Varginha UFO crash is stark. This is exactly the thing David Grusch has been talking about. The UFO crash retrieval programs, along with the cover-up tactics, have become so advanced and secretive that we now live in a day and age where even the Congress can be denied access to such information. But wait a second, how haven't we heard about anyone working on these crafts? Someone would leak this information by now, I mean... Oh yeah, someone did leak this information out to the world, and it happened almost 30 years ago. In the beginning, I showed you how accurately the X-Files actually got the whole story that has been going on in the shadows of the US military, but I wouldn't have guessed that it would get this close. David Grusch talked about an acquaintance of his that told him about reverse engineering programs and how compartmentalized they are. But he wasn't able to give us a name or a location of that specific individual, as they're still in the active service. That interaction is actually what turned him around and convinced him that the UFO cover-up is real and that everything is far more serious than he thought. However, if all of this sounds familiar, that is because Bob Lazar talked about all of this all the way back in the 90s and under quite different circumstances. Let me tell you this story from the beginning. For this, we have to go back to the year of 1989, when a stressed man came to George Knapp of KLAS Las Vegas TV with the story that, if true, would change the world as we know it. That frantic man was Bob Lazar, and at first he only appeared with his silhouette as he was scared of revealing his identity. And you will get why soon enough. The story that this man came out with was just different. Usually people in the 90s claimed that they had either been abducted by aliens or that they had telepathic communications with them. Bob Lazar, however, came out with this statement.
This week we've heard the contention of UFO researchers that there's a secret government within our government.
Right, this came from somewhere else. I mean, as bizarre as that is to believe, but I mean, it's there, I saw it. I know what the current state of the art is in physics, and it can't be done. They run gravity amplifiers. There's actually two parts to the drive mechanism. You're talking about contact, physical contact and proof from another system, another planet, another intelligence.
He claimed that he was working on reverse engineering alien craft at the S4 facility deep inside of Area 51 complex. Mind you, a base that in the 90s wasn't even really known about. He claimed that the craft he was working on operated using anti-gravity technology and that what he saw couldn't have come from any place on Earth. Lazar's claims were that the US government had in its possession 9 crashed or captured spacecraft from other worlds and that at least one of them was shaped like a saucer.
2 dinner plates, smushed together, right? The hump, and there's like a bubble on top.
Like the classic
saucer. Like that.
Funny coincidence, right? Well, anyway, Bob Lazar also said that the craft he was working on used an unknown element, namely the element 115. This element came with the craft, but Lazar was heavily ridiculed at the time because the element wasn't even close to being discovered. This is interesting because he alluded to having a small amount of it in his possession still, but I'll get to that later on in this video, because that exact piece of information is still haunting him to this day. What's most important about Lazar's story is that he didn't change any of it in the last 30 years. Lazar came out with stunning information and he stood his ground under all the pressure he was put under. He talked about his work experience in the secret facility, the strange information such as the origin of the crafts, and even the information about the pilots of the saucer-shaped machine he worked on. This all came to an abrupt end as one day he wasn't being called into work anymore. He started to panic and he decided to show some of his closest friends what he was working on. There even is a video online of what they were watching. He seemed to have gotten away with this, but on their 3rd visit, they were acting carelessly and they were even making barbecue. I mean, just imagine this situation. You're with your buddies, you're all talking, watching impossible maneuvers of a craft that isn't even from our planet, and then out of nowhere, a flashlight starts rolling towards you. And before you get a chance to tell anyone, all of you are surrounded by military personnel in unmarked uniforms. And you're being taken away. Well, Bob Lazar found himself in that exact situation with a gun pointed to his head, and in his words,
It did everything but physically hurt me.
Put a gun to your head
Yeah.
and said what? What actually put a gun to your head?
Guards there with M16s, and guys slamming their finger into my chest, screaming in my ear, some people pointing weapons at me. Like I said, it's not a good place to work.
they let him go in the end as no one had really broken protocol like him before. But what followed was straight up torture. He was being followed around, he was shot at, and even his and his wife's lives were threatened directly. I think that you can understand now a bit better why he came up to George Knapp as a way to protect himself. Sadly, Grusch hasn't had a chance to talk to him directly, but in reality, there have been no other people like Bob over the years, at least that we know of. But the tactics used to discredit him have made sure that no other person comes out with a similar story. The treatment he got would destroy most people's lives. He had his whole work history erased along with his academic records. He was turned into a lunatic and a nobody, really. You might think that this is taking it too far, but it's a really much more mild way of resolving these issues. I mean, the US military must have realized that making people have accidents brings much more attention to them than making someone into a crazy person. If you're wondering what I'm talking about, well, you can try figuring it out on your own. Whoa, what was that? Okay, weird. As I was saying, the secretive military organizations aren't strangers to destroying people's lives to throw them off a path leading to the truth about this subject. X-Files got this as well. The evidence of such things happening right now as you're watching this video is right in front of us. Just take a look at what is happening to David Grusch right now. They tried to legally get to him. They also tried using his PTSD as a way to make him look crazy, and they even threatened him and his wife personally. There doesn't seem to be a line that these organizations won't cross, but there is only one question in the end. What if any of this is actually true? In most videos, I want to be objective. If there is something to debunk, I want to debunk it, but today, well, it's a bit different. The cover-up of UFOs visiting us has been going on as early as from the 30s. I mentioned at the beginning of this video that the case had occurred in the early 30s, where Italy got their hands on a crashed UFO, which they were working on in secret with Germans before and during the Second World War. This probably was the origin of the Nazi Ultimate Wunderwaffe, or Wonder Weapons program. After the war ended, all of this was transferred to the United States, which I talked about in depth in one of my past videos, which you'll have at the end screen of this one. Also, the credibility of the Roswell UFO incident is, in my mind, really hard to dispute. I can't claim anything with 100% certainty, but I think something really did crash in the New Mexico desert. We also have the Varginha UFO Incident, which still could be the smoking gun evidence of extraterrestrial life. And along with the events that took place during the Operation High Jump, a need for an organization such as Majestic 12 was created. The pressure and fear tactics these organizations use make coming out with such information really a life-changing decision with little to no benefits for the people telling the story. I mean, just take a look at what happened to Bob Lazar. He is a man that never really profited from any information he gave to the world. He was put under several lie detector tests. Legal action has been taken against him for something no one usually goes to court for. And if that wasn't enough, he's still to this day being listened to. At least that is my conclusion, because during the filming of the most recent documentary about him, Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers, he and Jeremy Corbell were filming a segment regarding the element 115. Bob was visibly unsure of this move, and they even left their phones turned off in the car, but it didn't make a difference. Just 24 hours later, his whole house and workshop had been raided by the FBI, CIA, and DoD. The reason for this was some client Bob had worked for a year prior, as they labeled them a potential terrorist organization. They only needed the documentation of the work he did for them, but they turned his property inside and out. After this, Bob got extremely quiet about the possession of the element, but in my opinion, he's not lying about his story. And I'm not alone in that stance.
I wanted to know, with the Bob Lazar thing, I wanted to know, first of all, I want to be around him and see if I could smell bullshit.
Did you? Like,
No.
Okay.
No, I didn't, man. That was what's weird about it. Not only did I not smell bullshit, I went over all of his interviews. He hasn't done a lot, but he's done enough. And he's done them over the course of 30 plus years. And it's alarming how consistent his story is.
7.5 months before we went and I revealed his identity, people were really messing with him, breaking into his house, leaving the windows open, messing with things in his home, breaking into his car, leaving the doors and windows down, just messing with his head.
And you think that was the government that was doing that?
Yeah, I do.
The question of whether we are alone in the universe seems to have been answered a long time ago, but that answer has been kept away from us. The world used to be quite a different place back in the beginning of the 20th century, but it seems to me like we have been getting slowly prepared for the final answer. It's either that or the X-Files actually just nailed the story to its tiny bits, but who am I to decide? Along with that, all the other media also seems to have been preparing us for something similar ever since the 90s. This secret seems to be getting harder to keep, and that is one of the reasons why I make these videos. I want to bring this subject closer to as many of you as possible because people like David Grusch, Bob Lazar, and many others can't do this alone. I hope you took something interesting and new from today's story. I've also mentioned both Bob Lazar and the Majestic 12 a couple of times in my videos already, and I'd like to know what you guys want to see in the next one, so please let me know down in the comment section below. Thank you for watching and staying until the end. Before you go, subscribe to the channel and ding the notification bell as it really helps out more than you know. That will be it for now, and as always, this has been the UFO Lab. I wish you good luck in your search, and don't forget that the truth is still out there. I'll catch you in the next one.